As most people are anticipating the story's conclusion and awaiting the beginning of a new dawn, let us take a few steps back and refresh our memory on the single most important event that happened in Final Fantasy XIV, the seventh Umbral Calamity. What truly happened on that fateful day? What were the events leading up to it? How did it shape the world? And what came after? In this video, we'll be going over the full story of Bahamut and his brute sister Tiamat, both true dragons of Eld. Our story begins dozens of thousands of years ago, when the father of all dragons, Midgard Sommer, enters the Star of Hydaelyn and makes his brood here after his failure to fully defeat Omega, after his own star, the Dragon Star, faced certain oblivion. He made a pact with Hydaelyn, allow him and his children to live on this planet, and he would be devoted to both protecting the star and making sure that whatever secrets lie beneath the location we know as the Silvertear Lake will not be unearthed. Thus did his brood split into different corners of the world, establishing their own broods and spreading their dragon lineage throughout the star. Though their younger siblings would end up mostly setting up their eyrie much closer to home within the lands of Eorzea, Midgard Sommer's firstborn, Bahamut, alongside his brood sister Tiamat, ended up making their own eyrie beyond the southern ocean in the lands that are now known as Meracydia. It was a lush and a fertile land with no human population, and they were welcomed by a peaceful tree-like race native to Meracydia. The two had found an ideal place to raise their young. Towards the end of the Second Astral Era, mankind would enter Meracydian shores, but out of fear, they did not set foot into any domain held by the dragon kind. This created massive problems with resources and living space though, as more and more people migrated over to these new lands, which naturally led to a ton of fighting. That is, until they ended up coming to the dragon kind for assistance, believing that their great wisdom would offer a solution to end their conflicts. Bahamut agreed to this, and with him presiding over the affairs of men, the land knew peace once more. This golden age of harmony would be fleeting, however. During the Third Astral Era, the Allagan Empire rose to a position of great power, eventually conquering all three great continents. This wasn't enough for their ambitions, and they of course set out to capitulate Meracydia as well. The Allagans possessed of a lot of firepower, but these chimerical war beasts proved to be quite ineffective against the dragons, who tore through them like knife through butter with their fiery breath. And so, first blood was drawn between the Meracydians and the Allagans, which resulted in Bahamut and his dragons decimating their ranks. The Allagans realized that they had to integrate deadly new weapons into their arsenal, which would have to be created with this invasion in mind. One of the most effective weapons invented for use in the Meracydian campaign was the Kalia. This mechanized hydra was developed to specialize in combating dragons specifically, and it was practically immune to both their razor-sharp fangs and talons as well as their white-hot flames of dragon breath. With their new and improved weaponry designed to combat the dragons, the Empire had another go at an invasion. Bahamut fought valiantly, but in the end, the might of the Empire was too much for him to bear, and he was destroyed. As an act of desperation, and with the help of Ascian intervention, the native species of Meracydia turned to their deities for a final chance to drive back the invaders, by summoning them as primals. This dealt a devastating blow to the Allagans, and for a moment it seemed as if they were defeated, having to retreat all the way back to the coasts. This was when the Ascians offered the Allagans their ace in a lost hand, an extraplanetary being known as Omega. Omega ended up imparting a lot of crucial knowledge to Zand and his scientists, key among them the know-how to imprison primals instead of defeating them outright. This was the ideal solution, as the bane of the Allagans so far had been that even after a victory over a primal, which would often end up being costly, they could simply summon the deity again. With the aid of Omega, the Warring Triad, as they were called, Sephiroth, Sophia, and Zurban, were neutralized and taken to Azuzla to serve as a power source to maintain the floating research complex. With the Warring Triad out of the picture and the Dragon Horde destroyed alongside Bahamut, this deadly conflict over the lands of Meracidia would seem to come to an end soon. But the Meracidians were still not ready to concede. Tiamat was approached by the Ascians, who took her rage and sorrow over losing her brood brother as an opportunity to have her summon Bahamut as a primal, which she of course did. Her sorrow and anguish, combined with the rage of her kin, however, corrupted the spirit as it returned from the livestream. The result, a mad tyrant little resembling what had once been the Dawn Worm. The primal, full of rage, obliterated the Elegance. Zand, thrilled by the ever-changing tide of battle, was eager to keep fighting this war despite heavy losses, as he was slowly descending more and more into madness. The Elegant scientists eventually managed to achieve something once thought impossible: communion with the Voidsent. This opened up a lot of possibilities to the Elegance, and the key result was Zand forming a pact between him and the Cloud of Darkness, a self-proclaimed ruler of the Void. It would be a mutual relationship, as Zand could supply her with unlimited vessels to use as hosts, and in return, all Zand asked for was to have her aid him in the fight against Meracidia. This proved to be very effective, as the more this Voidsent army killed, the more their ranks grew. Eventually, this army grew so big that even the reborn Primal Bahamut struggled to combat their numbers. The Primal kept growing weaker and weaker as crystals required to maintain his strength became more and more scarce. And so Bahamut was captured with the use of receptors used to enslave a creature called Neurolinks, a device that the Elegants used to render dragons non-harmful. The war on Meracidia was incredibly devastating for both the Elegants as well as the Meracidians, and the end result was a continent that was now essentially a wasteland. But the Empire had gained a great prize: Bahamut. Once they figured out that you could use primals as energy sources by providing subjects and the means to keep praying to them perpetually, it opened a lot of doors. And with Bahamut specifically, they realized they could take advantage of the worm's affinity to fire-aspected ether to gather solar energy from the sun in a way that is far more efficient than the weak rays that naturally make their way to Eidolon's surface. At this point in time, Emperor Zand had basically lost it. He didn't find much joy in life, and thought the only thing left he wanted to do was to open a massive void gate to summon the Cloud of Darkness herself for the sole purpose of having something to fight against and have the world come to a brink of death. But this required a great amount of energy. For this reason, he had their scientists create the Dalamud, an iron sphere, and have Bahamut inside it. They then created an entire system around it, the Binding Coil as it was called. Most of the remainder of the Meracidian horde were taken aboard the Dalamud. These dragons, neither alive nor dead, although in a state that could still be described as under great agony, were enthralled by Bahamut and existed purely to preserve Bahamut's corporeal form. Additionally, the Binding Coil itself was a mechanism that would ensure that Bahamut would be eternal. Even should he be destroyed, as long as any piece of him remained, the elegant technology within would ensure his regeneration. On top of this, Dalamud also contained a ton of security precautions. Dalamud, in essence, was a vast and complex string of systems that would serve the Empire as an energy source for all eternity. It was a true testament to the marvels of elegant technology as well as their cruelty. Zand then had it launched into space and set it in motion around the moon, where the Primal was able to produce a ton of energy, as described earlier. There were of course parties involved within Alleg that didn't approve of Zand's madness-driven aspirations, leading to a ton of resistance groups being formed. It would seem that a civil war is going to be inevitable, which would be disastrous alongside the Void Gate opening and having to deal with the Cloud of Darkness. But those issues would soon resolve themselves. There was a grave mistake, a miscalculation. They presumed that the Crystal Tower can handle this immense amount of energy, which it actually did, but the ground beneath it gave way, which caused a chain reaction with tremors, mountains being toppled and the like. Eventually, the land was torn asunder, and all this culminated in what we know as the Fourth Umbral Calamity, or the Calamity of Earth. The Allagan Empire was finished, and the Ascians got to finally sow the fruits of their own labor by playing both sides of the conflict. Yet, although the Allagan Empire fell, there were a lot of remnants left behind. Some would end up seeing use sooner rather than later, such as their highly efficient table of glyphs for spellcasting, or the method by which to create soul crystals during the Fifth Astral Era, or the Sharlayans discovering their vast knowledge on Aetherites, which led them to create the modern-day Aetherite systems we know now. But the biggest thing yet was hiding in plain sight, its shadow looming over the realm for the next 5,000 years. The Lesser Moon Dalamud, as it would be called, became a normal part of people's lives to the point that eventually people came to widely accept that it was the loyal hound to the goddess Menphina, appearing in many religious works of art, and so its true purpose faded into obscurity. Some calamities happen and 5 millennia pass as we fast forward to a point towards the end of the 6th Astral Era. The city-state of Garlemald makes some technological advancements with the help of Magitech and starts to apply it to their military. They quickly grow in influence, easily overpowering nearby nations with their superior firepower. The Empire of Garlemald is founded by an Ascian named Emet-Selch, who becomes emperor under the guise of Solus Zos-Galbus. Garlemald is rapidly expanding, managing to subjugate all of Ilsabard as well as Othard, and eventually manages to get a foothold into Erzea following the fall of Alamigo, thanks to the 14th Legion's success led by Gaius van Balsar. Gaius was fixated on annexing the rest of Erzea. He and his generals came up with an invasion plan, of which the first stage was going to be to take the entire 14th Fleet, the invincible dreadnought Agrius as its flagship, and capture Mordona. This was due to the belief that the Silver Tear Lake had an abundance of ether that the beast tribes could summon a lot of primals with. When they arrived there, the father of dragons himself, Midgard Solmer, emerged. He called the Dravanian horde to his aid, and they obliterated almost the entire fleet, the flagship included. Gaius had no choice but to retreat back to Alamigo, where construction began for the Baelsar's Wall, intended to keep beast tribes and their icons at bay. This was the single most important event of the 6th Astral Era. The almighty Garlean Empire that so far carried an aura of invincibility around them was struck a devastating blow. It was a game changer politically. The Garleans had thought of Eorzea as an easy land to conquer, yet their mightiest fleet got decimated and their only attempt to get a proper foothold into the mainland ended in a bitter defeat. The Battle of the Silver Tear Skies came with the realization that something bigger is now in play, a superpower that could shatter an entire fleet. It was then that the Garlean leadership began to seriously consider if the prospect of conquering Erzea could truly be out of their reach. As a result, the Emperor grew desperate and approved of the Meteor project. Midas Nangarlon is given a relic passed down through House Darnus called the Lunar Transmitter. This is when the Garlean scientists figure out that Dalamud was not a natural creation, but an artificial satellite of Allagan origin. They plan to use the Lunar Transmitter to bring down Dalamud on Erzea like a meteor, hence Meteor Project. Bahamut was able to exert his will on Midas and tempered him. He used the lunar transmitter to contact Dalamud, but as he does so, Bahamut fires off a beam of energy onto the site where the project was taking place, completely evaporating everything near its vicinity. The Emperor calls off the meteor project after this incident. What follows is a decade of quiet, and Eorzea gets to enjoy what became to be dubbed the Age of Calm. For the following events, it's important to have a quick look at 3 key figures that would end up playing a major role in determining the fate of the world: Gaius van Belsar, Neil van Darnus, and Luizua Levelier. There exists a collection of writings by one prophetess, Messiah Thousand Eyes. These writings were dubbed as the Divine Chronicles. Each verse seems to refer to the events of a single astral/umbral era pairing. It was long believed that because 6 verses had already passed and there are only 6 elements to be represented, the wheel of death and rebirth had ceased to turn. This belief was called into question when a grizzled old huntsman stumbled upon the 7th verse written on a slab of a stone inside of a cave, leading some to correctly infer that the 7th umbral era would come to pass. The known verses are as follows. Luizua was among the few people that did take what was written in the verse seriously. He was born in Sharlayan, a nation which had a strong policy for non-intervention and avoiding warfare. Sharlayan had their own colony in the Dravanian hinterlands, but they abandoned it after they failed to negotiate a peace treaty with Garlemald, who refused to even meet with the Sharlayan envoy. Sharlayan obviously did not want anything to do with Eorzea's issues, and especially after their exodus back into Old Sharlayan from their colony, Luizua realized that he would be getting nowhere with this clone fiesta and took matters into his own hands. He met in secrecy with 12 of his students and formed the organization Circle of Knowing. Their goal was onefold: to save Eorzea from its impending doom. His eldest son, Horshanal Levelier, did not agree with this and came to resent his father. In his view, it harmed the reputation of the prestigious House Levelier of Sharlayan. When the Archons from the Circle of Knowing arrived in Eorzea, they split up and traveled to each of the realm's city-states, meeting with their leaders and offering words of wisdom regarding the reinstatement of the Grand Companies, and overall tried to rally the divided Eorzean city-states into being united again. Their efforts eventually paid off with the rebirth of the Eorzean Alliance. Luizua eventually departed from Old Sharlayan to more directly offer his aid to the city-states of Eorzea. He gifted his twin grandchildren Alphinaud and Alisaie the dual grimoire Adelphoi. The books appeared to be regular books when used on their own, but Luizua had in fact split the grimoire in half, meant to symbolize the twins having to overcome their differences and become together as one. Luizua would end up assisting the Eorzean city-states with their primal issues in the time leading up to the calamity, and he was seen as somewhat of a mentor figure by the members of the Circle of Knowing. Eula was born in Garlemald into House Darnus. House Darnus was an interesting family as it had access to elegant relics and knowledge. Eula was the eldest daughter of their house, which made her the heir to her family's secrets. Born into a prestigious house, she aspired to become a chirurgeon, a regular position for a Garlean woman of her parentage. She had a lot of admiration towards her older brother Neil, and followed him into the army, and so she entered the military life at a young age. Their father was already a legatus of the 7th Imperial Legion at this point in time, a position which he had earned through his heroic actions in the battles that saw Garlemald become an empire. Neil was groomed for the military since childhood so that he may one day be appointed to his father's esteemed rank of legatus. One day, their father sent Neil on a mission that ended in a disaster. Neil was mortally wounded and Yula was unable to save her brother, causing all her dreams to die alongside her brother right then and there. Now stricken with grief and filled with intense hatred towards her father, she assassinated him. At this point, Yula became full-on deranged, caused by all the shock of what was happening, and she started assuming Neil's identity to carry on his legacy. She had killed her father in a way that made it appear as if he died through disease. This worked out wonderfully for her, as it now seemed on the surface that their father had died and her brother Neil took over the position of Legatus. Of course, there were many who doubted the integrity behind these events, but Neil moved swiftly and used his newfound position of power as Legatus to have people closely related to her father executed publicly. Neil was not looked at fondly upon by most of the Garlean higher-ups, but her rank in itself allowed her to do all of these things with impunity. When it was time for Garlemald to start invading Other, the 7th Legion became renowned within the Eastern Theater, where it was bound by fear under Neil's leadership and managed to achieve many crucial victories within the different nations of Otard. It was at this time that she earned the nickname the White Raven, and she even received recognition from the Emperor himself for her ruthlessness and her success in the Eastern Campaign. Neil was an effective commander with outstanding bravery. Despite her position as a legatus, instead of sticking in the back, she preferred to join the advanced ranks and fight at the fore with her gun halberd Bradamante. She was skilled, extremely dangerous in combat, and ruthless. Born in Garlemald, Gaius served in many campaigns as tribunus under the 11th Legion. Through his exemplary leadership, cunning and combat ability, Gaius earned the rank of legatus of the newly formed 14th Imperial Legion, becoming the Emperor's favorite legatus. He eventually came to earn the nickname the Black Wolf. Gaius was not just an effective commander in battle, he also excelled as a governing administrator. This was witnessed by Eorzea firsthand after his successful invasion of Ala-Mhigo, which he managed with minimal bloodshed. He ruled Ala-Mhigo as an imperial viceroy and provided those under his rule with honorary citizenship and education, as long as they were willing to serve in the Garlean military. Though one would be naive to assume that the Garlean doctrination would allow a nation of all sunshine and rainbows. Indeed, his time in Ala-Mhigo could still be characterized by brutal oppression of its native peoples. His philosophy was very much that of the strong leading the weak by right, and he respected those he saw as competent, regardless of their background. He saw Eorzea as a divided realm of people bickering amongst each other and unable to handle the Icons, which is what motivated his repeated attempts at conquering Eorzea, believing himself the best leader fit to rule over them and save them through Garlean oppression. Gaius also despised the use of WMDs that would leave conquered land uninhabitable and cause unnecessary destruction, as he had a more traditional view of warfare in regards to conquering another nation, where the mightier nation gets the spoils of war and rules over the subjugated people. Amongst such weapons were the Black Rose and the Meteor Project, the latter which would cause him a lot of disdain towards Nile Vandarnus in the time leading up to the 7th Umbral Calamity. These three great individuals will each end up playing an important role in building up to what has to be the single most pivotal event throughout the course of FF14's story. The Emperor is dying and wants to conquer this cursed land of Eorzea before kicking the bucket, and so the Garleans have a take too at unifying the 3 great continents under Garlean rule. The 7th Legion, led by Neil van Darnus, is relocated from Otherd into Eorzea. The 7th and 14th Legions combine their powers and cause a lot of damage, mainly by cutting off trade routes between Eorzea and the east. They eventually manage to occupy Mordona, thus already gaining more progress than the disastrous invasion a decade ago. Neil, seeing the desperation within the Emperor, seizes this opportunity and proposes the idea of reviving the Meteor project to thoroughly cleanse Eorzea of its taint. The Emperor approves. The 14th Legion has to deal with a rebellion in Ala Mhigo, so the 7th is stuck in Mordona. They entrench themselves and send out cohorts to attack the city-states as a distraction tactic, while they fortify themselves and build the fortress Castrum Novum to house the lunar transmitter, the very same tool needed to control Dalamud. Yet, the Empire was not the only enemy with which Eorzea had to contend. Recognizing an increase in primal activity that appeared to coincide directly with the Empire's invasion, Muizua proffered a solution: use the adventurers to launch a 2-tiered offensive. This plan, however, was not without its complications. Neil van Darnus herself appeared before the warrior flight sent to slay Ifrit, drawing forth her halberd to slice open a plane of ether in the Primal's cloister and force an untimely retreat. Soon after, the Mughals of the Black Shroud summoned a manifestation of a fabled murderous regent, while the Ixali called upon the Mad Garuda. The Circle of Knowing scrambled to gather intelligence on these primals and the tribes who had, heretofore, been unable or unwilling to summon them. Under the Archon's guidance, the Warrior Flight was successful in their endeavors to temporarily quell the Beastman's wrath, yet it became clear these were hollow victories when it was discovered that the flood of ether which flowed from the primals upon their demise did not return to the land. It was instead absorbed into Dalamud. The realm, it appeared, could not be stopped from sinking even deeper into chaos. The legatus and commander of the 14th Imperial Legion, Gaius van Baelsar, begins to conspire with the Circle of Knowing and the Eorzean alliance in secret. He detests Neil's desire to completely obliterate Eorzea. There will be no one left in the lands they conquer, no citizens to conscript, no skills to exploit, nothing the Empire needs, and they will call it victory. On the surface, he was working alongside the 7th Legion to fulfill the Empire's goals, but in reality, he was doing everything in his power to sabotage Neil and her 7th Legion to prevent Dalamud's descent. The Eorzean alliance, tipped off by Gaius, managed to successfully assault Castrum Novum and destroy the lunar transmitter there. This did not stop Dalamud from descending, however, as Neil ended up using a part of the land in the Fields of Glory in Coerthas. Using elegant knowledge, she raised said part of the land high into the sky, which was named the Riven Road, and used it as a beacon to summon Dalamud towards Eorzea. Sid flies the warrior flight to Riven Road to fight the Legatus, where it became abundantly clear that Neil was tempered by Bahamut. This happened much the same way as it did with Sid's father. When she came into contact with the transmitter, she woke up the satellite's slumbering prisoner, and so her soul now belonged to Bahamut. Neil was already an extremely formidable opponent to begin with, but being empowered by Dalamud on top of it, it seemed like an almost impossible battle to win. Yet, the Warrior Flight somehow manages to defeat her, supposedly. Maybe she was unable to properly wield her newfound powers. In any case, it was a hollow victory, for it did nothing to stop Dalamud from descending. As it becomes clear that the defeat of Neil failed to halt the fall of Dalamud, Archon Luizua entreats the people of Eorzea to make pilgrimages and offer prayer to the marks of the 12 across the realm. The sage proposed that by invoking the 12 deities of the Eorzean pantheon, the realm might beseech the higher powers to repel Dalamud back into the heavens and seal away the elegant relic's power. Needless to say, this notion was met with some criticism. Some pointed out that calling upon the 12 in such a manner would make them no different than the savage beastmen who unleashed the primals upon the land. Others questioned whether summoning the 12 would not render all of Eorzea's people mindless thralls to their influence, as was seen with the beastmen's gods. Archon Luizua assured his compeers that his proposed invocation was not akin to a primal summoning. On the contrary, he would search for a way to entreat the 12 to merely lend their divine power to save the realm. The leaders of the Eorzean alliance accepted the gamble that Luizua set before them, yet none could deny an underlying feeling of despair, for history had proven time and time again that all eras of prosperity must eventually give way to calamity and chaos. As the Circle of Knowing completed preparations for the summoning, they beseeched adventurers to serve as its guiding light. These adventurers embarked on a pilgrimage to kneel before the marks of the 12 and summon the power of the gods. The Grand Companies did their part by leading the residents of the city-states in fervent prayer to their patron gods as well. In this time of impending darkness, it was said that the entire realm gathered to entreat the heavens with one voice, and Eorzea united by the litanies of its people. After their victory over Naelvan Darnus, Gaius appeared before the warrior flight to congratulate them on their feat. Gaius claimed Nael's followers believe he's still alive and have entrenched themselves at the heart of Eorzea, while sending a false report to Garlemald declaring Meteor a success and that the 7th Legion now plans to attack the Eorzean alliance. It was a grueling encounter as the elite 7th Legion fought tooth and nail to the death. They were zealots and fought hard even with their legatus missing. The Eorzean alliance outnumbered them massively, but the mixture of all the different factions meant that they could not coordinate any effective methods of attack. The 7th Legion also had superior firepower and made use of their magic knights and reapers to great effect. Then, the warrior flight showed up, which boosted their morale and they started to push back. But none on the battlefield were prepared for that, which brought the hostilities to an end. Upon quitting the firmament and entering the skies above Cardinal, the red moon cracked, and from within the iron sphere emerged an ancient primal the likes of which Eorzea had never seen. The vessel broken and Bahamut released from his shackles, the colossal worm took wing to inflict his millennia of rage upon the realm. The elder primal tore away from Cardinal and rained fiery hell upon the land. Both the molten shards that rained down from Dalamud and the searing flames which spewed forth from the Red Room's maw were indiscriminate in their path, and war became an afterthought as friend and foe alike fled the battlefield in terror. It was a scene of absolute despair and horror. The 7th Umbral Calamity was finally here. On that day, the world was changed forever. But what really happened that day? It seems as if no one has a coherent memory of the events that happened after Bahamut broke free. Just when all hope seemed lost amidst the chaos and destruction, the land came alive and showed signs of an inexplicable rebirth. The survivors of the calamity believed that Archon Luizua's invocation of the Twelve's power was the driving force which vanquished Bahamut, and could not be described as anything other than a miracle of the gods. Both speculation and rumor about the invocation would abound, with many speaking of a curious phenomenon in the sky above Cardinal, a brilliant light in the shape of a phoenix. Archon Luizua's body was never recovered, though fragments of his legendary staff, Tupsimari, were discovered amongst the debris in Cardinal by a twin adder search party. The devastation at the center of Bahamut's rage was absolute, making the details of what truly occurred on that fateful night subject to vigorous debate among scholars for generations to come. The calamity had myriad effects on the realm. The lush green lands of Coertas turned into a bitter wasteland where even the hardest plants refused to grow. Relics from past eras re-emerged, such as the Crystal Tower or the elemental's glamours over Amdapor being dispelled. But the biggest impact was the unimaginable loss of life and countless Eorzeans being robbed of their homes and livelihoods, for Bahamut had managed to wreak untold destruction before he was defeated. Gaius had been watching the Battle of Cardinal unfold from the deck of an Imperial airship, and he withdrew to Alamigo with the remainder of his fleet. He swiftly took the opportunity and sent his men to Castrum Novum and had them execute any remnants of Van Darnus' 7th Legion. After Gaius had secured the castrum for the 14th, he renamed it to Castrum Sentry. For the next 5 years following the calamity, the Garlean 14th Legion, led by Legatus Gaius van Balsar, heavily increased their activity within Eorzea, and proceeded to build a ton of castrums. One such stronghold was Castrum Occidens, which was built when a fragment that fell from Dalamud landed in eastern La Nocia. The Garleans discovered the fragment and built an entire castrum around it. They intended to make use of the elegant technology contained within, no doubt excited to procure something on the scale with the Ultima weapon. Gaius is fixated on finally conquering Eorzea using the Ultima weapon, an elegant anti-Acon war machina that the Elegans had used against Meracidians all of those ages ago, as his final solution. As a response, the Eorzean alliance launched Operation Archon, which results in the death of Gaius van Balsar, putting an end to any ambitions that the 14th Legion had. Shortly afterwards, Urianger suspects a primal awakening, followed by a grandchild of Luizua, Alizé Levelier, seeking out the warrior of light that slew van Balsar. She intends to explore the Dalamud fragment mentioned earlier to prevent the Garleans from obtaining any important Allegan knowledge or making use of their technology, and also to discover the truth about what happened with the 7th Umbral Calamity in regards to Bahamut and Luizua. As they get inside the fragment, they get stopped by all sorts of Allegan creations, both biological and their defense systems. As they descend, weirder and weirder things start to happen. Not only do they find themselves inside the Ragnarok, a colossal starship which fell away from the lesser moon moments before Bahamut burst free from his prison over the Cardinal Flats, but they also discover dragon enslaving technology and parts of Bahamut, such as a wing and an arm. After a ton of Allegan resistance, their final obstacle is Twintania, an ancient Meracidian wyvern who hatches children only to blow them up immediately? Yeah, she's probably not a great mother, but the biggest secrets are revealed as they reach the very bottom. Both Bahamut and Luizua yet live. They discover that Bahamut, the Primal, is within and seems to be regenerating, with its heart still intact. She is unable to talk to Luizua or do anything really, so you decide to leave and you somehow end up in a completely different place in northern Tanala. Alizé reports to Urianger, who confirms that Bahamut is indeed slowly sucking the land dry of ether. It seems as if the Dreadworm casts his dark shadow over Eorzea once more, There were 2 other enormous fragments of Dalamud that fell to Earth. Alisaie wishes to investigate those as well, and not just to prevent the calamity from happening again, but also to be reunited with her grandfather and discover the truth behind the 7th Umbral calamity. Thus, the 2 come up with a plan. Banish the Elder Primal by deactivating those colossal devices which hold him captive, so he'll stop regenerating. They locate the 2nd fragment in the North Shroud, but before you can enter, Alphinaud approaches you behind his sister's back. He is worried about Alisaie becoming too obsessed with saving their obviously dead grandfather and wishes her to find some true motivation and goals in life. You enter the 2nd coil, and after wading through some more Alag shenanigans, you meet Nael, who did survive your encounter in the Riven Road, after a fashion. She introduces herself as Nael Deus Darnus, having been resurrected by Bahamut to be used as a tool within the Binding Coil, and this time it's much more apparent that she is enthralled by Bahamut. After you ignored her warnings of exploring any further, she becomes increasingly more intent on killing you. Bahamut wants to keep her around to use her as a tool and entrusts all of his power onto her, after which she becomes a lot more draconic in appearance and pulls out the Bradamante, which she had recovered earlier from a man named Gilgamesh. The scene is perfectly set by an elegant hologram that Nael used to create the very same backdrop you saw all those years ago, the Riven Road bathed in a crimson glare. And so, you fight the broken Legatus under the moonlight of Dalamud for the last time. It's by far the toughest battle you've fought thus far, with Nael constantly assaulting you with both her draconic powers and her gun halberd. She's even able to replicate many effects that happened during the Battle of Cardano, such as stardust fragments of Dalamud falling from the sky and dropping Dalamud support pillars on you, and to top it off, she has a slew of Meracidian dragons at her command that answer to Bahamut's will. They spit fire at you, strike you with lightning bolts, try to freeze you to death, and God knows what else. Whatever danger she posed when you fought her at Riven Road, that danger is now increased by tenfold. But then, you have gotten stronger since then as well, and you managed to defeat her in the end. The glamour/hologram dissipates, and Bahamut relieves control over Nael, killing her shortly after before you get to learn much. The Legatus remarks the irony in her becoming enthralled in her attempts to destroy the continent plagued by primals, as well as Luizua's grandsire being the one to come to confront her. You get one final glimpse into her miserable upbringing that brought her here before Bahamut obliterates her. Alisaie is then shocked to find out that Luizua has become Bahamut's throng. This becomes crystal clear when he warns the Warrior of Light and Alisaie do not meddle with Bahamut's regeneration. This only really serves to strengthen her resolve, as she cannot tolerate her grandfather's legacy being ruined. Once again, you end up in Northern Danalan upon leaving. Now 2 more internment hulks remain, and Alisaie is determined in reaching them. The problem is that both of them are very much obstructed, and even reaching the exterior seems very technical, not to even mention the interior. That is when Urianger and Alphinaud come into aid. They figured out a way to get inside. The reason you always ended up in Northern Danalan was due to an ethereal stream that would carry you back there, kind of like an Aetheryte route. Urianger proposes to use that very same method to travel into one of the remaining internment hulks. They reverse engineered where the destination was. They then suggest using a modified Aetheryte that amplifies the etheric signature that originates from the same source as the entrance to that internment hulk. If the person traveling was to focus on said signature, they should in theory be able to make the journey there. The problem is that any form of experimental ethereal travel such as this are often risky and could cause great damage to one's body, lethal even. Alisaie is willing to take the risk, and Alphinaud forces himself into the expedition. He confronts Alisaie about her lack of a true motivation, only the vague notion she adopted from Luizua of protecting Eorzea. He insists that she should have her own reason to do so instead of riding off of her grandfather's motivations in life. But both of them realize that stopping Bahamut is more acute, so they stop bickering and enter the final coil of Bahamut. Inside, the twins are both shocked and disgusted at the realization of how Dalamud really operates due to all the suffering caused by Allag. Alisaie suggests that the regeneration system is also responsible for sustaining these captive dragons. Therefore, she assumes that shutting it down should make them all perish. Just keep that in mind for later. Then, you find the place where the Dreadwurm spent millennia in captivity, a small-scale replica of the Lesser Moon itself, where you have to fight one of those deathful Kalia units. You manage to smash it though, and then the twins finally come face to face with the enthralled Nguizua. He speaks from the point of view of the primal Bahamut, condemning all of mankind and proclaiming there is no peace for dragonkind until all of humanity is erased, even using the twins' inability to understand one another as an example. Alphinaud then takes a gamble and, under the assumption that Nguizua may have become a primal thanks to the desperate prayers of people during Cardinal and an abundant source of ether, calls him out on it, and he hit the nail on the head as Nguizua reveals himself to be the primal Phoenix.
Ah, so the possibility did not escape your notice. What I prayed for, and what I have become. These are the keys that unlock the truth behind Eorzea's rebirth. If you would have them, then you must needs take them by force. Come, rend this divine form asunder and claim your answers.
Become a primal?
It is difficult, I know, but you must accept it. That entity is no phantom or imposter. It is our beloved grandsire.
Please, for his sake and for ours, you must defeat our grandfather.
The Warrior of Light is forced to fight Nguizua, the Scion's former mentor, Twins' grandfather, as well as Eorzea's savior and legendary icon. With Bahamut's overwhelming presence in the background and a melancholic atmosphere, a speechless fight is fought where neither side wants to truly harm the other, as the Warrior of Light has to fight back against the Phoenix's fabled ability of immortality. After a painful encounter, however, you are able to strike a decisive blow and free Nguizua from his torment. Now then, this is where Nguizua explains the truth behind the events that unfolded that day. The spell intended to imprison Bahamut did fail, as Bahamut started to charge Terraflare, judgment that would bind all we hold to a memory of scorn. But before Nguizua could accept his fate at the hands of Bahamut, he had a moment of clarity and saw a colossal concentration of ether which had appeared as a leftover energy of sorts from the failed ritual. This drifting energy responded to the prayers of those fighting below and to Nguizua's wish for the realm's rebirth by infusing him with the power of a primal, which would manifest as none other than Phoenix, the ever-iconic symbol of rebirth. Using this newfound power, Wuizhua struck a lethal blow to Bahamut, resulting in a ton of ether raining down upon the land. Wuizhua released his hold over all the ether he had accumulated, so that it would be returned to the realm and allow healing to begin. However, Wuizhua had only dealt a single devastating blow to Bahamut, and though it obliterated him almost completely, a tiny part of him survived. Red Worm's tenacious will refused to give in and enthralled Wuizhua, being caught by surprise on top of his weak form after surrendering most of his ether made Wuizhua an easy target, and so he became Bahamut's thrall. Bahamut achieved this by seizing a portion of the power that Phoenix had surrendered, and so a part of his physical form survived before he could disappear. Like a parasitic fungus preventing a tree from getting full nourishment, Bahamut prevented the land from recovering fully. When he had regained a full grip on existence, he basically sucked all the remaining ether that remained in the air. Luckily, the majority of the ether did return to the land, which meant that alongside Bahamut's gargantuan size, he would be nowhere near regaining his full form just from that. However, Bahamut as a being was intertwined with the elegant technology designed to perpetuate him forever, and this fact would quickly rear its ugly head. As long as some piece of Bahamut remained, the coils would seek it out and continue their regenerative task, as that was the sole purpose of the binding coil of Bahamut, an elegant system designed to rebuild Bahamut should he be destroyed. And so, the fragments of Dalamud began searching deep beneath the ground for any signs of Bahamut, eventually finding his heart, leading to his slow recovery and thus the events of this storyline. Should Bahamut be rebuilt, it would no doubt cause a calamity far larger than that of the Seventh Umbral Calamity, as this time there would be nothing to oppose. And so, Wuizhua implores the Warrior of Light to do their utmost best to prevent Bahamut's regeneration. Wuizhua disables the second regenerating device and grants you access to the final interment hulk, the Burning Heart. He has one final touching moment with the twins, and as his final act, teaches them how to summon Phoenix. He then dies off. You enter the Burning Heart, but before you are able to shut down the final system, Bahamut makes his last stand and starts blasting the twins with gigaflares. Upon the brink of death, Alice is finally able to find her fiery soul, and the twins combine their powers, using their twin grimoire as one, as well as the power of Phoenix to prevent Bahamut from overpowering them. It's now apparent that there is no other option than to strike at Bahamut's heart, destroying his very soul, the crystal core that maintains his form. Yet, though the end of your arduous journey is in sight, doubt not but that the cornered primal will lash out with his unbridled rage. As you enter the heart, Bahamut makes his will manifest in the form of Bahamut Prime, and you have to fight what is essentially his soul. Though a lot more feasible to combat him in this form, you shouldn't take the Dreadworm lightly. Bahamut uses everything in his power to murder you, every single one of his attacks beating you to within an inch of your life. At first, he calls upon the Meracidian Horde to aid him, but eventually Bahamut will charge Terraflare, which you barely counteract by throwing everything you have at it, and he makes his final stand. The fight is now very personal. It's a battle between two iron wills, but you are able to get in a foothold while enduring the Dreadworm's constant barrage of incredibly devastating attacks. In the end, the Warrior of Light manages to pull off the miraculous feat of bringing Bahamut low, thus drawing the 7th Umbral Era to its conclusion. With Bahamut Prime defeated, Alice is able to fully disable Bahamut's regeneration systems, and the Primal is gone for good. With the future of Eorzea now secured, the twins have to make an important decision, and they decide that they and the Warrior of Light should be the final witnesses to the truth behind the calamity, since if people learned of the existence of Phoenix, they would come to pray to this deity to undo the suffering caused by the calamity, thus undoing all of their grandfather's work. Yet, Alisaie chooses to honor the memory of her grandfather as well as Neil and the Meracidian dragons. Having grown immensely from the experience, Alisaie promises the warrior of light that she would try to do some adventuring of her own, to go on a journey to try and find a passion, her own reason to fight for the realm. However, there is one final chapter to this story. A lot of events happen from this point onward in the MSQ, so I won't go over them much in detail, but eventually, the Warrior of Light defeats Elidibus, the last of the Unsundered. This allows an Ascian by the name of Fandaniel a lot of liberty, and well, this guy is kinda nuts and wants to reenact the final days and kill everything, including himself. There's many steps he took in preparation for this, but the important one to this story is that he was able to find a ton of dragons from the Meracidian horde. It would seem that Alisaie's assumption about shutting down Dalamud's regenerative systems resulting in the captive dragons perishing was wrong. Hence, all those dragons within the fragments of Dalamud would have made for easy subjects for Fandaniel/the Telephoroi to use. These dragons that already went through an immense amount of suffering were now used to fuel yet another primal summoning. The Telephoroi used them to summon a being they dubbed Lunar Bahamut, an even more twisted version of the once great dragon. And so the Meracidians were once again tempered to simply serve as a tool to be used for dark designs. So, all this time we've been talking about the Meracidian War, Bahamut's imprisonment, the events leading up to the Seven Dumur Calamity, as well as the binding coils of Bahamut. And while it is nice to talk about Bahamut, we should not be forgetting about his brood sister, the Duskworm. Some even refer to her as the Mother of Dragons. When Tiamat was tricked by the Ascians into summoning Bahamut, she became tempered. Now, her case wasn't as severe, which I believe is for two factors. One, she is a gargantuan creature, so completely stagnating/corrupting her soul is a difficult task. And the other is that her mental image of the thing she was summoning was not a divine being above her, but someone equal to her. Given that dragons are very intelligent, it's probably her iron will that saved her from being completely consumed and becoming Bahamut's thrall. Given Bahamut's own tenacious will under his primal form, it probably runs in the family. Nonetheless, as she was present during the summoning, she took a brunt of the corruption and was still severely affected. One of the effects of tempering, as we learn in 5.4, is that it causes the subject's soul to become umbrally charged, which results in the soul very much stagnating. This manifested in Tiamat by her becoming very apathetic. Tiamat and a decent portion of her children were captured by the Elegants once Bahamut was slain and the war was won. They were taken to the Delta Quadrant in Azuzla, where they were kept as test subjects on gauging Dragon's behavior. She makes no effort in fighting back or breaking free from her neurolinks, as her apathetic nature is making her remorseful, and she has spent the last 5 millennia or so in this state in Azuzla. But during recent events, the Scions, thanks to their experiences in the first, as well as elegant knowledge and a lot of effort into research, are able to come up with a miraculous cure for tempering. Though successful on more minor beings, they are unsure if they are capable of curing the enthrallment of a great worm like Tiamat. And luckily it works, and Tiamat's soul is fully restored. Enraged at the events that unfolded recently, she now focuses her energy on avenging her children that suffered at the hands of the Ascians and the Elegants, as well as putting any Meracidian dragon that has been twisted beyond recognition out of their misery. She flies to Pagaltan, a location in southern Danala, where the Telephoroi plan to wreak destruction, dispatching a vast host comprised of both Imperial soldiers and tempered dragons, with Lunar Bahamut at its head. It is here, in the battlefields of Tanalan, far from home, where the final chapter of the Meracidian Horde is written. She goes around Mercy killing any unrecoverable children she can find, and with the help of Estinian Wormblood as her rider, Tiamat strikes a debilitating blow on Lunar Bahamut, which allows the warrior flight to finish him off.
Antar